I remember the exact moment I stopped waiting for an apology. I was standing in my father's kitchen, holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched, watching my brother laugh with his arm around his wife's shoulders, while everyone in the room looked at me with that particular kind of pity, the kind that doesn't quite meet your eyes. The refrigerator hummed. Someone's phone buzzed on the counter, and I thought quietly, without drama, I'm done. That was 8 months ago. A lot has changed since then. Let me back up. I'm the younger of 2 children and what most people would describe as a perfectly normal American family. We grew up in a 4-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio. My father built a small but successful commercial real estate firm over 30 years. My mother was warm and distracted and gone. She passed from ovarian cancer when I was 11, and after that, it was just the 3 of us. My father, my brother, and me. My brother is 6 years older than I am. When I was in high school, he was already working weekends at our father's office, learning the business, being groomed. I didn't resent that. I was the one who wanted to study journalism, who spent her summers interning at the local paper, who had plans that had nothing to do with property valuations or zoning meetings. My father supported that. He came to my college graduation. He kept every article I ever published, printed and folded in a drawer in his study. I know because I found them after. The first time I noticed something was off between my brother and me, truly off, not just the natural distance of different lives, was at Christmas 2 years after I'd moved back to Ohio. I'd taken a job at a regional magazine and rented an apartment 20 minutes from my father's house. I thought being close would be good. I thought we'd fallen out of rhythm and proximity would fix it. What I noticed was this. When I walked into a room my brother was already in, something would shift. Not dramatically, just a degree or 2 colder. He would finish sentences faster. He would turn conversations towards subjects I knew nothing about, quarterly projections, a deal they were working on downtown, a golf trip I hadn't been invited to. It wasn't malicious at first, or maybe it was, and I was too slow to see it. The comments started small. Oh, you wouldn't understand the business side of it. Then, Dad mentioned you've been having some trouble at work. Everything okay? When I hadn't said anything to our father about work at all, then it's just different for you. You've always kind of done your own thing. I did my own thing. I worked. I came to Sunday dinners. I helped my father when his knee acted up and he needed someone to drive him to appointments. I brought good wine, and I listened to his stories about clients he'd known for decades. And I sat with him on the porch in the evenings, and we watched the light go gold over the yard, and it was everything. My brother had a key to the house. He stopped by more than I did. I'll admit that. He and my father talked business several nights a week on the phone. I wasn't part of that world, and I had accepted it. What I didn't accept, what I should have pushed back on sooner, was the slow erosion of everything else. The way my brother began answering questions my father directed at me, the way he started referring to the house as the family house in a tone that somehow implied I was a guest. The way, at dinner one evening, he mentioned to my father's oldest friend, almost casually, Grace has always been a little different from the rest of us. My name is not Grace. But that friend looked at me the way people look at something slightly out of place, smiled too warmly, and moved on. I let it go. I let so many things go. My father turned 65 in April. We had a party. Not large, maybe 40 people, mostly his colleagues and old friends, and a few of our cousins. My brother organized it. He'd rented out the private room at a steakhouse our father loved, ordered everything ahead of time, made a slideshow of old photographs. I brought a birthday card and a book my father had mentioned wanting, and I sat next to him at the head of the table and felt, briefly, like everything was okay. Then my brother stood up to give a toast. He talked about the business first, how proud he was of what their father had built, how honored he was to be a part of it, how much he was looking forward to carrying it forward. People raised their glasses. My father smiled, though something in his expression flickered, there and gone. Then my brother turned to me. I didn't expect it. He was holding his champagne and looking at me with an expression I can only describe as performed warmth, the face of someone who has rehearsed kindness. And, of course, he said, loud enough that the whole table could hear, we have to acknowledge the other half of this family. He paused. A beat too long. Our father always said that family is bigger than bloodlines, that you don't have to share DNA to share a name. Another pause. He tilted his head. I think that's beautiful. Really. I think it says a lot about who he is as a man. The room went quiet in that particular way that means everyone heard something that wasn't meant to be said out loud. My father's expression did not change. He was looking at his glass. My brother sat down. Someone started clapping, I think it was his wife, and others followed, uncertain, and conversation resumed, and the moment passed the way those moments do, folded into the noise of the evening and seemingly forgotten. But I had seen the faces around me. The slight frowns, the questioning looks at each other, the couple across the table who leaned together and whispered something. I didn't cry, I didn't leave. I ate my steak, and I talked to my father's college roommate about his garden, and I kissed my father on the cheek when the evening ended, and I drove home with both hands very steady on the wheel and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for 45 minutes. You don't have to share DNA to share a name. It was designed to plant a question without asking it. It was designed to let everyone in that room walk away wondering. And the thing about a question like that, planted publicly in front of people who know your family at a milestone birthday dinner, is that it doesn't need to be answered to do its damage. It just sits there. It grows. I thought about calling my father that night. I didn't. I thought about calling my brother. I absolutely did not. Instead, I lay awake until 2 a.m, and somewhere in the gray quiet of that hour, I made a decision. The next morning, I called my father's attorney. Her name is Carol. She has handled my father's legal affairs for over 20 years. She is small and direct, and I have always liked her. I told her I needed to meet with her privately, not about anything urgent, just a conversation. She agreed without asking for details. We met for coffee the following week. I told her what had happened at the party. Not emotionally, just factually, the way I've learned to present things when I want to be taken seriously. Carol listened with her hands wrapped around her mug and her face giving nothing away. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father has already been in to see me." I asked what she meant. She said she couldn't share specifics of his consultations, but that she wanted me to know that my father was not an uninformed man and that she thought I should trust the process he had already set in motion. I sat with that for a long time. Trust the process. I went home, and I thought about my father. I thought about the drawer full of folded newspaper articles. I thought about Sunday evenings on the porch. I thought about a conversation we'd had years earlier, when I was maybe 23 and frustrated about something, and he put his hand on the back of my neck the way he used to when I was small and said, "Patience is just trust with a longer timeline." I don't know exactly when I started to understand. My brother had been having conversations with my father about the future of the firm for at least 2 years. He'd mentioned it enough times in my presence, the plans, the transition, the eventual handoff, that I'd absorbed it as settled fact. The business would go to him. That was the shape of things. It made sense. He'd given his professional life to it. I hadn't. What I had done was show up. Every week, for 4 years, I had shown up. Groceries, when my father's knee made it hard to walk the store. Rides to physical therapy. Dinner on Wednesdays, not because I was asked, but because I wanted to be there. I had listened to his stories. Not out of obligation, but because I loved him and his stories were worth hearing. I had been present in the ordinary way that doesn't photograph well and doesn't make good toasts at dinner parties. My brother had been building a case. I had simply been his daughter. The call came on a Thursday in November, 7 months after the birthday party. My father had passed in September, quietly in the hospital, with me on one side and my brother on the other. His heart had been struggling for a year. It was not a surprise, and it was the worst thing that has ever happened to me, and I am not going to write about it here because some things are not for sharing. Carol called to say that the reading of the will had been scheduled and that all parties needed to be present. My brother called 20 minutes later. He was pleasant, efficient. He mentioned the meeting, said he assumed we'd ride over together, said he was sure it was straightforward. His voice had that quality, the smoothness of someone who believes they already know how a story ends. I told him I'd meet him there. The office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, quiet and carpeted and smelling of old wood and paper. Carol was already inside when we arrived, seated across a wide table. My brother sat to my left with his wife beside him. I sat alone and I put my hands flat on the table and I thought about my father's porch and how the light looked in autumn. Carol read through the preliminary sections. The standard legal language, the dates, the designations. I watched my brother's face as she worked through the document. He was composed, expectant, the expression of someone waiting for confirmation of something they already know. Then Carol reached the distribution section. The house went to me, fully, outright, no conditions. I had not expected that. The investment accounts, split evenly. That I had expected. The business was more complicated. Carol explained the structure carefully. Our father had established a trust 2 years prior. The trust held the controlling interest in the firm. The trustee, until such time as the business was formally sold or transferred, was me. My brother made a sound I'd never heard from him before, not quite a word. Carol paused, looked at him, and continued. There was a letter, separate from the legal document. Carol produced it in a sealed envelope addressed to both of us, and she set it on the table and asked if we wanted her to read it aloud, or if we preferred to take it privately. I said aloud. My brother didn't say anything. Carol opened the envelope and unfolded 2 handwritten pages in my father's deliberate, slightly cramped script. He'd written it 14 months before he died. I did the math without meaning to. That was 3 months before my brother's toast at the birthday dinner. My father had already been thinking. The letter did not mention the toast. It didn't need to. My father had a way of addressing the center of a thing without circling it. He wrote that he had watched, over several years, the way his household had shifted. He wrote that he had heard comments he was not meant to hear and been told things that were not true by someone who believed he was not paying attention. He wrote that he had spent a long time deciding whether to say something and that he had concluded saying something was not the right answer. What matters is not what is said about someone in their absence, he wrote. What matters is who shows up. He wrote that the business decision was not a punishment. He was clear about that. He wrote that he trusted his son was capable of building something of his own, and that he had faith in him, and that he loved him. He wrote that the decision was simply accurate, that it reflected what he had actually observed, which was one child who had been physically, materially, consistently present, and one who had been strategically so. He wrote near the end, I know who you are. I have always known. That was never in question, not for a single day. The room was very still. My brother stood up. He didn't say anything to me. He said something to his wife in a low voice, and she gathered her bag and they walked out, and the door swung closed behind them. And Carol and I sat in the quiet for a moment. Then Carol folded the letter back into the envelope and slid it across the table to me. He asked me to make sure you kept this, she said. I pressed my hand flat on top of it and looked at the ceiling and breathed. I want to be honest about what I felt in that room, because I've told this story to 1 or 2 people close to me, and I've seen them expect a particular emotion, triumph, maybe, or relief with a sharp edge. And yes, there was relief. But the loudest thing was grief. My father was gone, and no legal document and no letter and no amount of being seen and known and chosen was going to change that. The inheritance didn't feel like winning. It felt like an afterword. A footnote to something that had already ended. What mattered was in those 2 pages. I know who you are. I have always known. I have not spoken to my brother since that day. He sent me a message 2 weeks later through a mutual cousin, something about wanting to discuss the business arrangement. I replied through Carol, I am not interested in litigation or drama or the drawn-out bitterness of contested estates. I hired a manager to run the day-to-day operations of the firm while I figure out what comes next. Carol says my father would have approved of that. I think he would have too. The house is strange to be in alone. I spend weekend mornings there sometimes, just to be in the rooms, to sit on the porch where we used to sit. The yard needs work. I started doing it myself, which is something I didn't know I wanted until I found myself out there on a Saturday morning with gloves and a rake and nothing on my mind except the smell of October leaves and the particular satisfaction of a task, that is simple and visible and done. My father's study is the hardest room. I've been through it slowly, the way you're supposed to, not rushing. In the bottom drawer of his desk, behind a folder of old utility bills, I found them. The articles. Every piece I'd ever had published, going back to a campus newspaper column I'd written at 22 about the experience of being a first-generation college student, printed and folded. Some of them with small penciled marks in the margins, underlines, asterisks, the occasional good in his handwriting. I sat on the floor of his study for a long time with those papers in my lap. I've been thinking lately about what it means to be chosen, not in the dramatic, romantic sense, but in the ordinary, daily sense. To be chosen means someone kept showing up. It means someone paid attention when it was inconvenient, when there was nothing to gain from it, when the room wasn't watching. My father chose me every Sunday evening for 4 years. He chose me in every asterisk, in every margin of every article I wrote. He chose me when he sat down with Carol and revised his documents and sealed a letter in an envelope and trusted that it would find me. My brother planted a question in 40 people's minds at a dinner party. He implied, publicly, that I was something less than a full member of my own family. He used the language of inclusivity as a weapon. Isn't that something? He believed, I think, that doubt was enough, that once people wondered, the wondering would do his work for him. He was not wrong that it stung. He was wrong about what it meant. What I've learned, what I keep turning over, the way you turn a smooth stone in your pocket, is that the people who feel most threatened by your presence are rarely the ones who know you best. They know the version of you that inconveniences them. They know the space you take up, the things you might one day be given, the question of whether you belong. They do not know the drawer full of articles. They do not know the porch at dusk. They do not know what it sounds like when someone says your name like it's the most natural thing in the world. My father knew all of that, and he wrote it down so that I would have it, long after the words couldn't be spoken. Last month, I drove out to see a house in western Pennsylvania, not far from a small lake my father used to fish when I was a child. I don't know if I'll buy it, but I sat on the back steps in the late afternoon and watched the light move across the water and thought about what comes next. Not with dread, for the first time in a long time, but with something that felt like honest curiosity. I have a letter in a drawer. I have a porch I'm learning to keep. I have a body of work and a life I've built without anyone's permission, and a very clear sense, finally, of exactly what I'm worth. That's enough. That's more than enough. To anyone out there who's ever been made to feel like a footnote in your own family's story, I want you to know that the people who underestimate you are almost always operating on incomplete information. They see what you don't say, what you don't fight for, what you don't demand. They read your patience as weakness. They read your silence as surrender. They are not reading you correctly. Somewhere, maybe, someone is paying attention, marking the margins, keeping the things you made. And when the time comes for the truth to be told, not loudly, not publicly, not with any satisfaction that looks like cruelty, it will be told accurately. In an office, on 2 handwritten pages, in the language of someone who was watching all along. Trust the process. I do, now.